So I'm here today to kind of talk about how to develop that strategic vision for your career plan, especially in supply chain management, where I've spent the bulk of my career. And I'm going to kind of go through a couple different areas today. So first, I'll give you a little background about who I am, how to define your career goal, managing your career, soft skills, taking stock of those soft skills, and maybe some tips and tricks about social media since it's such a big part of our lives today. So let's just kind of spend a little time about who I am. So like Mike said, my name is Amy Augustine. I'm currently the Senior Director of Network Supply Chain at UScellular. I've been at UScellular almost 15 years. We're going to talk a little bit about my journey as I walked through the slides tonight about what I've done there. Overall, I've had over 20 years in supply chain roles. I'm currently a member of the board of directors for the Association for Supply Chain Management. Like Mike said, I did get my MBA from Loyola way back in the day before they offered a supply chain management specialization. So I did operations management and international business. I did my undergrad at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, and I majored in engineering management with a specialty in manufacturing engineering. And I'm very passionate about leadership and talent development. And so this is kind of a topic near and dear to my heart. I talk to my team all the time about how we grow our careers, grow our skills, and try to make better use to help climb that corporate ladder if that's what you desire to do so. A little bit about my role at UScellular today. I lead our network supply chain. So I have responsibility for strategic sourcing and procurement, forecasting and planning, inventory operations, and logistics and warehousing. And so it's been a journey. If you know anything about the telecom space, basically my team supports the building and maintaining of cell sites. And so it's a very complex project, and my team's just one spoke in the wheel that helps engineering build, and it's not easy. And those of us who work in the telecom space have a lot of I'd say war stories and to share. And so that could be for a different topic another day, Mike, if anyone wants to know what it's like to work in telecom. So that's just a little bit about me. And so I want to start with career goal, right? So what is your goal? And goals change over time, right? And how do you measure that you've been successful at your goal, right? And then the second question, how are you going to reach that goal? What's your strategy? What are the actions you're going to take to get there? And what are the skills that you need to build and develop to help reach that goal? I can share, I've had a couple different, I would call them careers in my life. I started out not in supply chain, but implementing drawing control systems for basically plant lines. Got into supply chain because I was working on a very large SAP implementation for the US Army. And I was not a techie SAP developer or configurer. I was a process person. And so that's really how I got into supply chain. But back in the day when I was in consulting, my goal was to be a director at KPMG, the firm I worked at. But my goal changed along the way because I met my husband, right? And so I knew I couldn't travel 100% of the time like I had been doing. And so that changed my career goal, right? So I loved consulting, but I knew I couldn't stay there. So what did I want to go do next? So luckily for me, I found a local small consulting firm that I ended up going to work for. And so, yes, my goal changed a little bit. And maybe I wasn't focused on getting that elusive director role in the consulting firm, but I still was honing my supply chain skills, but in a different way. And to me, like measure of success, it doesn't always have to be monetary. It doesn't have to be title. For me, it's how do I feel fulfilled at the end of the day? And how do I feel when I leave my home office or my work office and I turn this off and I turn on my family life? Do I feel like I've done a great job? That's how I measure my success. I mean, titles, money, it can come and go, but really for me, it's about how do I feel fulfilled on the inside? And do I feel like I've left the day doing the best job that I could? And we're going to talk a little bit about how we reach our goals during this presentation. So let me move forward here. So when I think about managing my career, I think about it in 3 different facets. So I think about it in networking and mentors, career options, and learning and education. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes into these things, but it's really, I see it in these 3 areas that I have different focuses on when I build out my development plan for the year. And really at the high level, right, networking and mentors, it's really to talk about others about supply chains and getting involved with other areas to help grow your skill sets that you may not get in your current role. With career options, and I'll touch on this a little bit, I've had a couple roles at UScellular that have not been in supply chain. And that's been very strategic on my part to take those roles to learn a little bit different area of the business. And like I said, learning and education, it's a huge piece of how I continue to grow as well. And then maybe I'm not going to go back to school to get a second master's or a second bachelor's, but there's other opportunities out there for learning and education. So I'm going to spend a little time talking about networking and mentoring, and I'm going to touch on sponsorship, which I don't have on this slide, but sponsorship is something that you do need to start thinking about the higher you go up in the food chain in an organization. And so for me, networking is a huge part about how I grow my career and grow my skill sets. And so everybody for the most part is on LinkedIn. And so I make it a point to regularly reach out and talk to my contacts on a regular basis. So I will pick 2 to 3 people per week and I'll just send them a message, hey, how's it going, right? At the same token, anytime I get a connection request that's not a sales one, but is one that somebody just wants to network, we'll set up time to talk. I can tell you I've probably done that about 25 times this year, and I find it very rewarding and very just a way to learn about other parts of supply chain or technology that maybe you're just aren't exposed to in your current job. I'm also very passionate about mentoring. And when I talk about mentoring, and I put the comment on here, think about board of directors, right? So I don't have just one mentor, I have multiple mentors, right? And it's because I pick certain people who are really good, for example, in communication or network distribution studies. And I reach out to them and I say, hey, can we talk about this? Can you help me? Can you help me solve this? Can you help me understand what I need to do here? And so I have a whole group of people that I consider my board of directors that are my mentors that help me solve problems or are my sounding board when I need to bounce something off of someone that is very, what I would consider neutral and not part of the situation that I'm dealing with at the time. And so I highly encourage you, when you are thinking about finding someone to help you with a skill that you want to develop, like executive presence or supply chain planning, that you find multiple mentors in that area to help you, because you'll get very different suggestions and opinions that can help you grow your skill sets. So I'm going to stop here for a second. I'm going to talk about sponsorship, because like I said, I didn't put it on the slide, but the higher you go in an organization, you're going to eventually want to find a sponsor or 2. And I have to say, I would not be sitting in this role today at UScellular if I did not have a sponsor who was willing to go out and effectively advocate on my behalf for this role. And I'll share that actually the past 2 roles that I've had at UScellular, I have not interviewed for them. I basically have gotten a call up or was asked to go to someone's office and was presented with the job offer. And so a lot of that is due to the fact that I had sponsors advocating on my behalf when a role became open. And so this is even more important as you want to get to that executive level, if that's what you desire, is to have those sponsors in place to help advocate for you and be at that table and your voice when you're not there. So I'll take a second, Mike, and pause to see if there are any questions.
Yeah, actually, I have a question if that's okay.
Yeah.
Industry associations. So you're quite involved with ASCM, or what older folks like me refer to as APICS. Can you talk a bit about how that's played a role in your career, either from a networking perspective or just in general?
So I'll talk about it from a networking. I actually have that in a future slide to talk about. No, you're setting me up, Mike. So from a networking perspective, I love the fact that I took a chance when I got an email from APICS at the time, but now ASCM, for a call for volunteers. And I submitted my name and my resume for a committee and was actually selected to be on that committee. And I have met some of the most trusted advisors in what I would call my tribe through that committee, that a couple of us are all actually on the board of directors of ASCM now together. And so the caliber of people that you will meet, folks that, live all over the world, by just raising your hand and saying, hey, I want to volunteer for this committee, it's been amazing. And so when you think about this, a lot of these professional organizations, they are global. So it just helps you expand your reach with networking, that it's not just folks in the United States or your home country, it's global.
Okay, great.
All right, I will move forward. All right, so let's talk about career options. So this is where I'll just share a couple anecdotes about my career at UScellular. And so, everyone thinks there's a traditional career path in supply chain. I'm going to say there's not. And so maybe you start in logistics, you go to planning, go back to warehousing, you become a leader along the way, maybe your supply chain strategy. But one thing that I've learned from my career is you need to take a risk in a role that you might not be excited about or even think that it can build your career. So for example, I was the senior manager of reverse logistics at UScellular. So basically I was dealing with all the return devices and accessories and basically making sure none of that stuff was going into a landfill. So the end of the business, the tail end of the business, right? I was told at the time I was ready to be promoted to a director, but unfortunately in supply chain, there were no director roles open. So I had to go look outside of supply chain. And I was encouraged to apply for the director of corporate business strategy. So I applied, I interviewed, I got the job, I took the job, and I went from all the way the back end of the business in a very operational supply chain role, all the way up to the front of the business, where I basically was working with our executive team on strategic priorities for the future. And my role also included having to put together board of directors books on our competitors, where we were like in rolling out new products and services. I had to work with all the executives across the organization on what are some of the business cases. And so in fact, I was able to work on our 5G rollout strategy for UScellular, and it was very different strategy from what we had done in the past. But if you think about this, right, just very different from a true like supply chain operational role. This was very much sometimes think tank, get in a room all day and whiteboard ideas. So very different than what I was used to on a day-to-day. This took me out into a whole different level for me. And I was very uncomfortable in the beginning, right? Because this is wasn't natural to me. It wasn't what I was used to. But I am so happy I took that risk, because within 6 months of me taking that job, they were telling me I was going back to supply chain. And it took a few more months to get back there. But this is the first time I was presented with a role where I did not have to interview, and the role was created for me. So always think about that. Like maybe it's going into product management for a year and coming back. Maybe it's going into finance and coming back. It just remember that it pays off some to take that risk and just learn a skill that maybe you wouldn't learn in a true operational role, right? And so the second thing I'll say is remember lateral moves are just as important as moving up. A lot of times moving sideways, it's going to help you move up faster if that's what you desire, right? Because it just gives you a much more well-rounded breadth of knowledge that you can take into your first leadership role or your first strategy role or your first, more senior role in supply chain. And then, like I said, think about both the soft skills and the technical skills that you're going to gain in a role. I also, when I was younger in my career, would think about, well, what am I going to learn in this role? What am I going to bring to this role? And then what am I going to leave this role with, right? So really trying to think through what a role and what kind of skills you're going to learn on that role. Now, I threw out here one other caveat. When asked to take on a special project, always say yes. And so this also for me has helped me along my career where I was asked like, hey, do you want to help us launch the iPhone? Yes, sign me up, right? Do you want to run the change management track of our return to office project? Yes, sign me up, right? And so yes, you might be taken away a little bit out of your day-to-day activities, but the exposure you get to other parts of the business, other folks in the business, and those skills that you get to build just from, like I said, me leading change management. And I was asked by a vice president to do this because I know so many people across UScellular and I have a pulse on how the associates are feeling. So always say yes, because then it leads to more responsibility. So that special project that I had helped me get this role when it became open, where they just, like I said, called me up and offered me the job. And part of it was I was willing to say yes to a special project and basically do both my day job and this special project together. Now, I do know sometimes you have to say no due to personal reasons and stuff, but I always say, like, make sure if there's nothing really holding you back, say yes.
Amy, could I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
You mentioned that you previously, or maybe even started your career in consulting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering how much this advice depends on working for a company like UScellular versus maybe working in a pure consulting environment.
So I would say this also applies for a pure consulting environment because you also have different practices in consulting. Sure. And I would even say, even if you go into like supply chain technology, right? There are different parts of that technology organization, such as product management, the implementation piece, even with consulting, right? When you're, big firm like Deloitte, KPMG, there's, you have the WMS practice of Manhattan, you have the SAP, but there's also ways to work through that and say, hey, can I go learn and do a stretch assignment on Manhattan or vice versa on SAP? Or if I'm in a supply chain strategy practice, can I go work in the supply chain risk management practice, right? And so I think there's ways in consulting too to work through and take different assignments and different projects based on what you think where you want to go in your career. Another great example would be if I was in consulting and I was in supply chain practice, I might ask to go work in a mergers and acquisition practice for a while, just to get, like I said, a totally different view of a role in a consulting company that I would learn some skills to bring back to a supply chain practice.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yep, you're welcome. All right, so learning and education, my third thing that I talk about. So obviously, formal education, and I have a typo on there. This must be my old deck, so I apologize. But formal education, right? Loyola, mini MBA, MBA, masters, tons of schools have technical degrees you could go back and get to. I know my company pays for bachelor's, master's, right? All that stuff. But then I also think in ways of like certifications and certificates. So, I'll plug ASCM here. They have both certifications and certificates. So I have a certification as a supply chain professional, right? I have crazy tests you have to take, you have to pass. It's not a simple thing, but I can keep it up with maintenance points and I never have to take it again. And a lot of employers look for that CSCP designation. They also have rolled out certificates, which are smaller. You can take the test multiple times. In fact, I have my team taking multiple certificates this year just to help them boost their skills. So, and then I think ISM has a certification. So really thinking about where you want to go in your supply chain career, and think about, does a certificate or a certification make sense? Professional organizations. So I get called out, ASCM and ISM offer programming for both free and then for a fee. And so when I think of ASCM, their student memberships, I think the basic membership, because I actually have to pay to be a member, even being on the board of directors, is like $10 a month, $100 a year. It's nothing astronomical, and most employers will reimburse you for that. But what that $100 gets you is access to webinars, articles, and other training that's not available to the public, right? And I know, being involved with ASCM, we do a lot of podcasts and LinkedIn Live events that are available, but the bulk of the material that's produced is not, and it is behind a login that you have to get. Also, these professional organizations have a network. So for example, ASCM has a whole mentoring community where you can go out and reach out with other folks and create that mentor-mentee relationship. It has a job board. And like I said, being able to be involved in a committee. And so I'll share, I'm still involved in multiple committees at ASCM, including one that produces the top 10 trends in supply chain every year. And the reason why I love this, because it takes me out of my day job and it makes me do research, and I have to read a ton and I have to distill what I think the future of supply chain is going to be. And then I get to vote. And what's the really awesome thing about this sensing committee, it's global. So it's not just folks here in the US doing it. It really is a global committee that we work with folks. In fact, I was partnered one year with someone from Switzerland. And yes, the time change makes it fun to try to get together, but it's all worth it in the end. And it draws back in that networking and folks that you have to draw on throughout your career going forward. And then I'll say conferences, right? And conferences are put on by the professional organizations, trade journals. So I think like Inland Distribution was last week in Chicago, put on by the Journal of Commerce. ASCM had theirs earlier in September. I mean, there's Manifest in February in Vegas. I mean, I feel like every month there's a supply chain conference. I'll even throw it out there, go speak at a conference. I think public speaking is a huge goal, and the higher you grow in your career, you need to be comfortable in doing public speaking. And that, could be getting up in front of your executives, getting up in front of your board of directors, what have you, but just getting comfortable in being able to deliver a message in front of a large audience is something I highly recommend. I work for a smaller company. We don't have huge teeny budgets. So one of the things why I speak at conferences is a lot of times they'll comp your registration fee, which is a huge expense. And then you're just looking at your travel. In some cases, I've had my travel actually paid for some of these conferences I've spoken at. So just something to think about as you grow your career. If you work for a really small firm or a firm that just doesn't believe in sending you and paying to go to conferences, there are ways to get invited to a conference by just volunteering to sit on a panel to share your insights or doing an actual presentation.
Amy, I'm wondering, when in someone's career do you think certifications and certificates, make the most sense?
So I would say, Mike, kind of maybe not entry level, but when you're starting to get your second or third job, I would start thinking about certificates. or certifications. I feel when you're first coming out of school, you're kind of learning the business world as it is. And to, like I said, when I took the ASCM, or back when I took it was the APIC certification, I mean, it was hardcore. I was studying for days. It was like I was back in school. And then it's a pass or fail on the exam, and you get one time to take it for I think it's like $600 for the testing credit. And so for me, like, I feel like you need to be a little bit established and feel like you're doing well in your job before you can, I would say, try to like bite off a certification. Now, a certificate, I would say, might be a little bit easier to accomplish even as an entry level. So I have a couple entry level people who are going to be doing some certificates this fall, just because it's a little bit less time consuming, and I think it's easier for them to digest of where they're at in their role in their career.
Sure. Okay.
All right. So I'm going to transition into soft skills, because I think this is a huge, huge, huge part of anyone's career. And supply chain, we're so great. We can go get technical skills, like I just talked through, like formal education, certificates, networking. But I think sometimes we forget about the really critical soft skills that we need to be successful in a role. And so the first thing I'm going to talk about is communication, right? And so you have to be able to effectively communicate to your audience. And so one of the things I work on with my team, and this is still a work in progress for myself, right? Because every time you get a new leader or a new executive come into an organization, they have different styles of communicating and ways of receiving that communication. And so I'll share right now, I basically work for 2 accountants, right? And so to me, they both have very much into the numbers, not so much into the process, right? So I have to make sure when I tailor my updates to them, I'm talking more about the dollars and the numbers of inventory, and not so much about the process of how we're handling the inventory, right? They look to me like I'm the expert in that. They just want to know the numbers and the working capital. And so for me, that was a little bit of an adjustment, because my prior leader was more of an ops guy. So he was more interested in the process stuff and not so much about, well, how much working capital do I have sitting in these warehouses and how are we like going to move it? It was more about, do we have any leaks in our processes? How are we so it's just very different. And so I can't press enough about how people have different communication styles, and you have to take that time to learn them. Right. And I'll share another big lesson learned for me was when I was a fairly new leader. I had an associate that I needed to give some feedback to. And in this case, I gave it to the person like right away in the moment, and it went over like a lead balloon, right? It did not go over well. It just was a bad situation that was actually made worse. And so what I learned out of that experience is a lot of times with communication, you have to make sure that the person receiving the message from you is really in that right frame of mind, right? So if you ever read that book, Crucial Conversations, and if you haven't, I highly recommend it. And it really talks about how you have to recognize if you're in the right mind frame and the receiver's in the right mind frame. And a few years later during my leadership career, I had another situation where I had to give feedback to an associate, and I chose to wait because I knew this person was not in the right frame of mind. Now, what did happen in that situation was I got accused by another leader of not handling it right then and there. And I actually got sent to Crucial Conversations training. But the really funny story out of this whole thing was I was told by the instructor I could teach the class. So sometimes that like miscommunication happens within the leadership team, but me waiting to give that associate the feedback actually made the situation better, and he was receptive to the feedback that I gave him. The second thing I'm going to talk about is credibility, right? And so really building that credibility among your team, your peers, the folks that are above you in the company, the folks that are below you, and really delivering on what you say you're going to deliver on. I've seen a lot of people fumble where they lose credibility because they say they're going to do something and then it doesn't happen. Now, there's a difference, right? If, yes, I'm going to do something and I've run into a roadblock, right? And you're communicating back to folks that you've run into roadblocks, this is going to be delayed. But if you say you're going to do something and you just never do it, you're going to lose credibility with the peers around you and the folks in your company. The third thing that I'm huge on is relationship builder. And so to me, this helps you build collaboration. And one of the really tough things that I've been in the past couple of years is actually this role. And so supporting our network engineering group, and I can say this because I studied engineering. Engineers are a different beast of folks to deal with. And so they're very much, at least at UScellular, my way or the highway. And they had done a lot of management of the supply chain up until the point where I was put into this role. And so I had to use my collaboration skills, my relationship building skills to really forge some relationships that they would understand, right? Like, I'm not taking over their job. I'm just taking over the supply chain activities that belong in supply chain, which frees you up to do what you need to do best, which is making sure that we're building cell sites. And so it wasn't easy. There was a lot of resistance. Could have a whole presentation on change leadership and change management because of that. But really, you got to build those connections. Sometimes it's really building that personal connection first and not going in and just railroading everyone like, hey, I'm taking over this process because I own it. It's more of like, hey, how's your day going, right? And then it's building up to, can we discuss this process and where's the right home for it, right? Where does it make more sense? And so when you do kind of those first three things, you start building this trust and respect, right? And so folks can grow to trust you, can trust your supply chain skills. They grow to respect you as someone who is knowledgeable on that subject, that you're willing to work with others to get things done. And it just continues to evolve your, like I said, your presence, your communication, and your credibility. It's kind of like this circle. And that rolls into the integrity, right? You do what you say you're going to do. You don't do anything else. You're really there to help and just kind of show that it's a partnership, going back to that relationship building and collaboration, and that you have integrity in your actions and you're not there to really drive dysfunction or arguments across the folks. And so one of the things that my team has worked on really hard this year is our integrity skills, right? And so I would love to tell you all that like network supply chain has the best relationship with engineering. No, we're still working on it. But I can say we have integrity with them, that they should trust what we say, and they do now. And they used to blame all their problems on us. They really can't do that now because we're telling them when a part's delayed, right? Or the supplier's not going to meet when we're going to get it in, right? And we're actively working to identify alternative suppliers to solve the problem before it becomes a big issue. So we're gaining this integrity with them, which I think is super important because that wasn't always there, and it's been a journey. And that leads into your ability to influence. And I think once you have all of this, you're able to influence how others act and make decisions in your organization and your peers. And even for me, like my peer in engineering, who actually was my leader at one point, I very much now influence him to help influence his team when we need to make decisions on purchasing strategies for our build plan, right? And so very much all of these work in tandem, but they're very important soft skills you need to build as you grow your career. And this, for me, is what's made me super successful I would say not just at UScellular, but even in consulting and working with different clients, it's made me very successful by making sure I've always honed these soft skills. So I'll pause there. Mike, do you have a question for me, or if anyone else has
No,
a
I just want
question?
to echo your comments about Crucial Conversations. That really is a great book. And to be quite frank, my wife and I both read it. It even helps us talk to each other. So that's, but yeah.
Actually, I should probably tell my husband and I we should probably read that book.
Well,
And then when my son gets older, he needs to read that book.
yeah.
But yeah, so let me move forward. All right. So how do I build my let's call it my development plan for the year? Because I actually am required to have one for UScellular, but even if I wasn't, I would still put one together for myself every year. And it's kind of like one of those things I do I evaluate myself at the end of the year, like around Christmas time. And I think about, okay, New Year's kicking off. What am I going to go work on for the next 12 months to kind of hone my skills? And so when I think of my body of skills, I think of a couple things. So leadership. So where do I need to grow my leadership skills? Teamwork. How effective am I collaborating across organizational boundaries, both internal to UScellular and external, because I use vendors. And then now even with my board of directors duties, how am I working with the other board of directors and helping them and helping us drive the ASCM forward? I always take stock of my soft skills, my technical skills, and then I think about my performance and results from the previous couple of years. So where did I excel? And maybe where did I kind of, not do as well as I thought I wanted to, right? And so really being honest with myself on what I needed to do. And so I'll share, like at the end of last year, one of the big things was, okay, I need to do more public speaking. So, right. So I have volunteered at anybody who's reached out to invite me to a conference or a roundtable. I have volunteered to say, hey, do you need a speaker on a panel or this? Now, sometimes I think I've overcommitted on that, and that's my own fault. But this year, I mean, I was sharing earlier, I think I will speak at 8 conferences when it's all said and done, right? And so that's either I've given a presentation or I've sat on a panel event. And really for me, it's about getting comfortable, doing something, volunteering for something like this, right? This gets you comfortable in being able to public speak. And so for me, I wanted to make sure I did a little bit more public speaking this year. One of the other things that I think will be on my goals for next year is my written communication. And so a year ago, my team and I wrote an article. It was accepted by a journal. And so really, I would like to do that again next year. But right, like I have to be very deliberate in setting that time and understanding, hey, what am I going to use? What soft skills, what technical skills, what am I going to write about? And really set myself up to learn something while writing an article, right? When I think of leadership, right? So leadership could be many different things, right? So I am a leader of a fairly large team. I think in all I have 50 people when I count all my contractors. But how can I help leadership across other areas of my organization? So for example, DE&I, right? So I'm on the board of directors for one of our associate resource groups, the Asian American Network, right? And so I'm an ally. I was asked to be a part of their board and I said yes. And part of that is me helping the national lead, who's not a leader of people, hone her skills in becoming a leader as leading that board through the activities we need to do this year. I mean, prior to that, I also was part of our women's group. I was on the board of directors there for a while. So leadership can show up in those special assignments. So when I go back a couple slides, I said, say yes to a special assignment, like ARGs or ERGs, whatever your company calls them, are a huge opportunity for you to stretch and grow your leadership muscle, even if you're not a leader of people. I also consider leaders being able to mentor, being a mentor to others, right? So I mentor a lot of folks today. I have mentors. I even challenge the leaders on my team to mentor folks across the organization because I do find it so rewarding. And I do think mentorship is two ways that you're able to learn from both parties. When I think of teamwork, very much about how do I collaborate? How do I work across boundaries? How does my team work together? I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, I was running a team and I had two associates that just were knocking heads, and they both would come to me. Both would come to me and was like, just throw the finger at each other. And I was like, no, right? Like, it goes back to, we all have to respect each other. We all have an opinion, but at the end of the day, we're all working for the same common purpose because we all work for UScellular and we know where the company needs to go. So I need you two to work out your differences and really come to the table and listen to each other. And so for me, part of that teamwork plays back into those soft skills. And I really didn't talk about listening too much, but I feel it's kind of covered in communication, but being able to listen and be a part and give an opinion and making sure that everyone's voice is heard is really what I think about teamwork there. And I know we talked about soft skills, technical skills. To me, one of the big things I'm working on this year, my technical skills, is understanding what kind of supply chain risk management technology is out there. So one of the big deliverables I had to create in my job this year was a supply chain risk management plan, which was probably overdue. But prior to me taking this role, we really didn't have a network supply chain. We had a leader with 5 analysts that operated like a help desk. But one of the big things UScellular is going after a lot with a lot of these telecommunication and broadband companies is the BEAD money. And so the federal government requires you to have a supply chain risk management plan. And so I spent the first 9 months of this year putting together a plan. Now, do I think it's the best one? No. Do I have insight into my suppliers? No. I have to basically depend on my suppliers to tell me if they have an issue or not. But it doesn't mean I know there's that I can't think about in the future going to a technology that would give me that insight without having me to rely on a person to give me that information. So I've done a lot of research this year on some supply chain risk management software, understanding what's out in the marketplace. In fact, here's another great example. I get invited to a ton of these, I'm going to call them networking dinners, but basically what it is, it's a technology company that wants to bring in supply chain leaders, and they want to hear your pain points. And so one of them happened to be on a supply chain risk management software platform. So I learned a ton. I took back a ton, and it helped me, even with my skills, understanding what I need to put in to this risk management plan and what do I need to drive my teams to really think about when we're monitoring our supply chain risk. As I said, so it all kind of fits together. And like I said, I take stock, I write a plan. One thing I'll caveat, my plan changes throughout the year because things happen and you might get into something and say, "Ooh, no way, I don't want to do that anymore." And so to me, I just don't write it and I put it away. It's an active living document that I look at probably once a week to make sure that I'm on track with making sure that I'm developing what I need to do to get me to the next level.
I'm curious, Amy, to what extent is this a culture at UScellular, or is this just something innate to you?
So I would say it's definitely in the culture of UScellular. We're all required to have an individual development plan. I would say I take it to the next level where I'm kind of more hardcore with it and using it to really own my own career, right? That's the one message that I always give my associates is I can help you open doors, but at the end of the day, you got to own it. So I practice what I preach, right? I have to own my own career. I do think there are some people at UScellular that fill out the Word document and they file it away and they go check, right? And so, but you can tell the folks who do it and practice what they preach because they're the ones that are moving, right? They're the ones you see the growth in. so I'm going to spend a few minutes just talking about one last thing, and it's social media, because it's so prevalent. And I actually have done a ton of work myself on my social media profile, my LinkedIn profile. And so I'll caveat with, these are kind of my tips. So use LinkedIn to share your accomplishments. If any of you are LinkedIn with me, like, I share anytime I'm speaking, when I'm published as an author, my team does something great, I win an award, I am sharing that, because no one's going to toot your own horn but yourself. And so it's really about sharing. Now, you also have to be careful, right? Because you don't want to share anything that's confidential to your company. You don't want to do anything that's going to get you in trouble with HR. Hence, keep it professional. Like I mentioned before, I use LinkedIn to network with others. It really helps me understand where things are going in an industry, or if, for example, AI is such a hot topic. I've used LinkedIn to talk to some AI experts, right? So, like I said, use it. Like, people are actually a lot more open to talking than you would think, which is actually surprised me a little bit. If you are going to post something, keep it simple. Don't overthink your message. So I know there's some people that write blogs and stuff, but if you're just simply hey, like, I think I did this to Mike, thank you so much for the invite, right? Super short, 2 sentences, a couple of hashtags, and you're done. Don't overthink it. Comment on other posts, especially when somebody's asking for thought leadership in supply chain. I've done this. It really sparks some conversation. And once again, you can network with folks that maybe you might not have if you hadn't posted your thoughts on an article. And I think one of them that I did recently, or a couple months ago, was there was a Wall Street Journal article on the ports being the bottleneck and the catalyst for all the supply chain issues we had last year, which was a very narrow view of everything that happened, and really was only one little sliver. And I think I was one of the first people who commented, and I kind of disagree. This is one little part, but it actually started upstream in Asia when you had issues where things were open and close. And even all the way back there, it started with consumers had a lot more disposable cash with everything being locked down, which then the supply chain went crazy because the demand on certain goods spiked, and it just started this snowball effect. So, don't be afraid to comment your thoughts on something, right? And then, just as a reminder, that recruiters and hiring managers will look at social media profiles. And so I absolutely have seen people actually let go of companies for posting something, I would say, political or inappropriate. And so that's why I'm a very big proponent of, I have Facebook for my personal, private, family life, and I have LinkedIn for my public, professional life. And you'll see that when you go on LinkedIn. Just be careful, because I'm telling you, I've done it. If I'm interviewing somebody, I'm Googling that person. So absolutely, if you've never done it, Google your name and see what pops up. Because hiring managers and recruiters do that, and they do it often. And so I would say it's one of those things, if you're going to do LinkedIn, just keep it really professional, post about supply chain if that's what you're passionate, toot your own horn if you win an award or an accomplishment, or, I've had people on my team even post about they had a great mentoring session with somebody and thanking them. So super simple. It drives awareness of you out there. So it's not, you're being seen by others and not just who's in your contact list. And so with that, that was I don't know if you have any questions on this before I flip to my last slide.
Actually, I do, if you don't mind.
No, not at all.
Although we should be mindful of the time, but I'm curious. So been hearing for a long time, right, that if you post inappropriate stuff, that hiring managers or companies will see that. Yeah. I'm wondering, on the flip side, though, to what extent does a hiring manager or someone in your shoes look to LinkedIn to learn about someone's experience and passion, as a plus or an asset in someone's profile?
Yeah, that's absolutely why I go to LinkedIn, is really to find out like what are they passionate about? Are they really a supply chain thought leader like their resume says, right? And if I go and I see something totally different, like you're posting like your dog went to the vet, like I'm going to be kind of like, wait, what is this, right? Because and so that's where it's really for me, and I'll say like I have people look at my profile all the time now, right? And so I want it as professionally as it can be. um Not that I advocate for this, but there are people you can pay that can make your profile look great. And if that's something you want to do, I absolutely agree to it. Like, I'll admit I paid somebody to help me fix up my LinkedIn profile because I am not a marketing person by any means, but LinkedIn is basically marketing yourself to other folks that you're a supply chain expert. So that's why like I'm very, very passionate about how you use LinkedIn and how you show up, because so many people do look at it, and you don't want to be one of those people that, like I said, throw
Yeah.
up pictures of your dog and it's like, ooh, you just lost out on that job.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Yep. So that is basically what I had, Mike. I do have my contact information here that Mike can send out. Like I practice what I preach. So if you want to have a conversation with me, reach out. We'll absolutely talk. I have no problem. Like I said, I think networking is a huge part of how you learn about different parts of supply chain and other organizations. So absolutely feel free to reach out. And with that, Mike, I don't know if anyone else has any other questions.
Well, they should. But first off, let me say thank you, Amy, for the presentation. It was quite interesting.